Welcome to 40 Degrees South and Rising, a national tasting talk experience supporting Negociants USA and produced by the Wine Education Department. Negociants USA is and has been a leader in the premium Australian and New Zealand and South African wine importers to the United States. They have 20 generations and over 500 years of combined winemaking history, and we can be very proud that they are a part of our Winebow family now. The Wine Education Department, where we inspire, equip, and empower you to be the very best professional you can be. This presentation is really about looking at the latitude that is unique to South Island, New Zealand, as well as Tasmania. 40 degrees south is a rare wine latitude for the world because of several factors, but let's just talk about latitude at the moment because latitude changes a lot of things. Latitude dictates hours of daylight. It dictates the length of the potential growing season. Average daily temperatures are relative to latitude, and all of that sets the stage for what kind of disease pressures you'll expect, as well as what kind of pests you'll have in the vineyards. The tilt of the Earth's rotational axis provides us our four seasons, and the 40 degrees north and south latitude offer that maximum opportunity for the seasons to change sufficiently to offer a real winter for full dormancy for the vines, which is a key element to growing healthy, awesome vineyards. In the southern hemisphere, the options for latitudes in the 40s is very scant. When you look at the globe and you start to spin it around at 40 degrees south, you don't run into a whole lot of land. You have Chile, Argentina, Tasmania, and the South Island of New Zealand, and that's it. The rest of the world is water. Not just water, but relatively cold, relatively stormy water. That is a huge difference to what you find in the northern hemisphere, where as you travel around at 40 degrees north, you run into continents, lots of them, and there is not nearly as much open ocean. Even though the northern Atlantic is large and the northern Pacific is large, it's not nearly as expansive as just the space of water between southern Argentina and then the next landmass is Australia. It's an enormous amount of space. And this is what you get. This is a great picture of the roaring 40s. This is probably taken in the 50s of latitude, but this uniquely southern ocean effect. When you are crossing from South America and just head east, unless you start to go north from the 40-degree line, you're not going to hit any land until you get to Australia. Matter of fact, you're not going to hit land until you get to Tasmania. And in that process, you're going to be crossing thousands and thousands and thousands of miles of open ocean that is drastically affected by the Antarctic, as well as the storms that have nothing to abate them from east to west. It is an enormous influence over both New Zealand and Tasmania that there is nothing really blocking the influence of the roaring 40s until you get to them. This is an area where gales happen almost once a week, where storms can be in the neighborhood of 2,000 miles across, affecting literally millions of square miles of ocean. The prevailing winds of the world are what you see here, and what I want you to notice is how the prevailing winds of the southern hemisphere in the roaring 40s and the furious 50s are so dedicated to that easterly flow, how they're flowing dramatically from west to east, blowing all of that storminess, all of those storms heading towards the Australian continent and New Zealand. And note that as you get over to the corner of the screen, Tasmania actually is above the lower portions of the South Island of New Zealand, allowing all of this effect to completely slip right by Tasmania with no effect whatsoever. This is 4 million square miles of ocean can be affected by one storm in the Southern Ocean. The average daily wave heights through the roaring 40s without any storms going on, this is just average daily wave heights, 15 feet. Rogue waves in the 50s and the low 40s, or the high 40s I should say, those rogue waves where different swells get together and they hit each other. 100 feet is not an unusual occurrence. It actually happens, which is why there are so many shipwrecks in this part of the world. It's a very different scenario than the North Atlantic and the North Pacific, where you do have eventually something stopping that massive amount of motion. What that also blesses us with is this wonderful reality that vineyard pressures are different at this 40 degrees south latitude. Higher latitudes in general offer a reduction in pests and vine diseases. Each region will have something that either helps or hurts with this, but in the case of southern hemisphere, the vineyard areas of higher latitude are also relatively dry. The cooler climate reduces insect pressure, and the drier climate reduces mold and mildew pressure. While Bordeaux and Tasmania and New Zealand have similar heat summations and sunshine hours, the humidity and rain of Bordeaux creates major issues with mildew. Not so in the alpine rain shadows of New Zealand, southern Tasmania, and actually northern Tasmania. Tasmania deals with some botrytis and downy mildew, and actually the botrytis they can put to good use and make botrytis affected wines intentionally, but they don't deal with it nearly at the level of Bordeaux. When you're looking at southern Tasmania, the vineyards of Coal River, where Tolpuddle is, you're talking about 8 inches on average per year of rain. It's really dry. There's a fairly large mountain just to the west of the Coal River Valley that blocks almost all the inclement weather coming across, that's blown in from the west and hits the western shore of Tasmania. There's a mountain range there that sucks those clouds dry, and what comes over is not in a huge effect to that southern area. When you're in the northern part of Tasmania, you have more rainfall. It's more predictable, and so and it's a little warmer, which is why the great vineyard sites are really within maybe 5 or 7 kilometers from the actual ocean, and have a sort of a Carneros effect where the cool breezes come in the afternoon and chill the land down because the hot air has risen off the land. You can actually see the ocean from both Dalrymple and Jan's vineyards. Daylight hours are super important and majorly affected by latitude. If you are living on the equator, I had the privilege of living at 7 degrees north latitude for 3 years, and there's almost no variation in daylight at that latitude, and at 0 degrees you have exactly 12 hours of daylight and exactly 12 hours of darkness every day of the year. As you increase your latitude, your number of daylight hours in the summer part of the year increases and decreases when you're looking at wintertime, based on the tilt of the earth. So when you get to 50 degrees north, it's fairly extreme, and then when you get into 60 degrees north, you're talking about 5.75 hours of dusk at certain parts of the year, and actually no complete darkness at parts of the year. All of that daylight hour time frame is what gives you the ability to ripen grapes at lower temperatures, because the photosynthesis continues to go on, and you can ripen grapes using light instead of heat. So here we have a graph I found that really kind of demonstrates this. In this idea here, you can see that each color line is represented by a latitude line. Note that at the latitude 0 is the red, there is no change. At latitude 10, there's just a gentle curve that barely, doesn't even get to a full hour difference between night and day year round. And then you can look at the super extreme of the purple line, which is latitude 60 north, where in the summertime you have nearly 19 hours of full-on daylight. That's a huge amount of daylight, but it's really cold at that latitude, and that ability to get the earth warm for enough time to grow grapes doesn't work, at least not at our current climate. But when you drop down to the 50 degrees north line, that black line, which is where we have the Mosel River Valley, for instance, in Germany, you've got 16 plus hours of daylight for a solid month of the year, which is right in the middle of the ripening period, and notice how it increases past 12 hours of daylight fairly quickly after bud break, which is the nexus of this graph is basically the spring solstice to the winter solstice. And you can see how this growing season, whether you're at north or south, is fit inside this curve. What's really interesting is if you do a little bit of basic graph math here, and this is rough, so this is not I didn't get out my integrals and calculus to do this, but at 30 degrees north, you can expect 2,513 hours of daylight. That's not the same thing as sunlight, but daylight per growing season, or winter solstice to summer solstice to winter solstice. At 40 degrees, it's 2,546 hours, so you're getting 33 more hours than at 30. At 50, it's 80 more hours per year than at per growing season than it is at 40. And if you went all the way to 60, you'd have 322 more hours of sunlight over the 50-degree mark. The problem is it's just too cold, so it's not really about sunlight at that point. Now it's just temperature. Another really cool graph I found was this same idea, but here they're showing it to you by the percent change over time. So notice that the percent change in daylight at the 60 degrees north happens really fast, and then wavers along through the 12-hour mark. But let's look at where we're growing grapes, and that is the 30 degrees to the 50-degree mark. Notice how, especially at 50 degrees, which is what makes it possible for this extreme climate, is that it goes very quickly into more daylight hours and then sort of slows down its rate of change through the growing season as it backs out. We have a beautiful, gentler slope at that 40-degree line, but still a fast increase in the spring, followed by a slow decline in the fall. This is a beautiful thing for grape growing because we need to get quickly beyond frost and move on into something that's an even tempered number of hours of daylight to keep grapes ripening at a nice rate. So it's not just about daylight. There are other things to consider. There's wind. There's also the idea of actual sunshine. And so the picture on the left is an example of, well, it's daylight outside, but it's kind of cloudy. So you're going to have way less photosynthesis happening in picture on the left than you are in the picture on the right. What's interesting about the 40 degrees south and rising wine areas is the picture on the right is the more common picture, in that you have a rain shadow and a lot more daylight, and sunshine matches up to it. Not like 100%, but certainly in a very positive way. So the average hours of sunshine in Marlborough, for instance, which is on the north end of the South Island of New Zealand, is 7.6 hours per day in the growing season. So even though you might have 16 hours of daylight at its maximum peak or whatever for that, well, I guess at that latitude it'd be more like 14. 7.6 on average is cloud-free. In Otago, it's 7.5. So you have slightly less hours than in Marlborough per day. They have a little bit of cloud cover sometimes. In northern Tasmania, the other issue, by the way, of Otago is that the mountain range is close by, and so as the sun fades into the west, it starts to become shadowed very quickly, sort of like being out in the shadow of the Rockies in Denver, that when the sun sets, you don't get as many sun hours just by nature or direct sunlight because there's a shadow from the mountains. In northern Tasmania, it's 9.4 hours per day in the growing season, which is tremendous. And then the Coal River Valley, where Tolpuddle is 8 hours per day. So even though we're further south, in those particular areas, we don't have as much cloud cover. We have the rain shadow, and it has a huge effect on grape growing. So the next issue is temperature, right? So you could have all this light and all this sunshine hours on top of daylight and have temperatures that are too low to grow grapes. But at these latitudes, the 40 degrees south latitudes, where we're growing grapes, we have almost idyllic temperatures for growing grapes. We have, and keep this in mind, that as we're going through this, that 50 degrees Fahrenheit is the magic number where the vine comes back to life and starts to work towards ripeness every day. So it's not necessarily your average daily temperature that matters, it's the number of hours above 50 degrees that matter. So anytime that you're sitting at 32 or 45 or even 48, the vine isn't really working, and then anything over 50, it's working. And then there comes a point where it's so hot that the vine will shut down, which is what happens in southern Rhone and what's happened in very hot climates. Barossa Valley or even Napa Valley has periods where it's so hot the vine just quits and goes, okay, I'm done for the day, it's got to cool off. So temperature and its range of temperature is really huge, and the thing you hear talked about regularly is diurnal shift, that difference between daytime high and nighttime low. Tasmania and the southern island of New Zealand is blessed with a beautiful shift between nighttime and daytime temperatures. So here's a graph that's Blenheim, which is near Marlborough, New Zealand, and this is the average. You know, it doesn't show the peaks and the valleys that happen on the occasion, but this is the average daily temperature in Fahrenheit, even though they measure it in Celsius. I wanted to make sure it translated well here. In Fahrenheit, between daytime high and nighttime low throughout the year. Now note that their growing season is September through April. They're probably harvesting in April. They're probably having bud break in September. Note that in this particular section of New Zealand, the daytime versus nighttime temperature is not a huge shift, but it's super consistent. So the vine stays in this place of activity that allows it to push through this long growing season with a very gentle rise towards ripeness. If you look at Gibbston, Otago, which is further south in New Zealand and now in a continental sort of mountainous region, you see that, oh, we have a lot of arid mountain type air here. We've got a big time rain shadow. We have some elevation effects. And what do we get with the same sort of graph? We get a much larger diurnal shift where in the peak of the summer, we're seeing an average temperature at like 71 degrees and an average low at 49. That's a 20-degree shift that really offers you this beautiful warm summer ripening period that doesn't get too hot, followed by a cooling period that lets the grapes rest overnight, but never allowing them to go too far in one direction. But as you get a little closer, you start getting towards April, where we're probably looking at harvesting at maximum late April probably. You're starting to see lows that get close to frost lines. So it matters a lot, and it's beautiful, but it becomes tenuous in southern New Zealand. There are certain areas, like the area where Sam Neill first planted his vineyards for 2 paddocks, that they said, you know, great Pinot Noir can't be made here. It's not warm enough. It doesn't have enough heat summation hours. But I think when you taste the wines, you will see that that is just not true. Now, Launceston is one of the 2 large cities for Tasmania, and this is not where they grow the wine, but this is where I could get a weather graph, and then I'll adjust this to where, for instance, Dalrymple and Jans are out in Pipers River. So note here again that you have a fairly large diurnal shift on Tasmania between nighttime and daytime temperatures, which is really great because it's much warmer on the north side of Tasmania than the south, regularly having spikes into the high 80s, even low 90s. But what happens is in the wine regions themselves, Pipers River, etc., they have pushed these regions closer to the water. And the Bass Strait to the north of Tasmania is sort of like dealing with the water off of San Francisco. It stays in that mid-50s range. It's not warm. It's got a cold current that goes through there. And so the air gets really warm on the land. It rises, and then it sucks in air off of Bass Strait. And when I was standing there, I could actually feel, because it had gotten warm that day, I could feel the cold draft coming in off the ocean and cooling the vineyards down. So what you see here is the ability for it to get pretty warm there, that all of a sudden the ocean says, oh no, we're not going to get that warm, we're going to cap out, and then we're going to start dropping again. And this is one of the reasons that northern Tasmania is really great for making sparkling wine and also making super well balanced New World Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. When we look at this more specific graph, we can actually see how, like I was telling you, there are times when it gets really hot. I mean, the maximum temperature recorded in the city there is 102 in the peak of summer. But notice also that your record lows are not horrible. We're not talking about an area that has killing cold, so they don't have to worry about clonal selection like you would say in the upper Midwest of the United States, or maybe in northern Germany, where they're definitely going to deal with well below freezing temperatures, which allows them to grow these delicate varietals that aren't and without the fear of having them freeze. But you'll also notice, for instance, in the April time frame when they're about to harvest, when I was in Piper's River, Dalrymple had not harvested all its Pinot Noir, and it was April 6th, and they were expecting to harvest it in about a week, whereas Jan's had harvested their grapes for sparkling wine. So that gives you an idea of what's going on. And in April, your average high is about 65, 66, and your average low is somewhere in the neighborhood of 41. When I was there, it was pretty close to that exact thing. I woke up in the morning and it was cold enough to need a jacket, even though I was just heading to the car, and then by the time I got to the vineyard, I was taking the jacket off because it was sunny and warm. New Norfolk, Tasmania is to the west. As a weather station, it's to the west of Hobart, up into the Huon Valley, which is one of the more recent plantings for grapes to make wine. And I want to compare this to Hobart. Note here you have the extreme and diurnal shift, 20 degrees Fahrenheit on average during the summertime, and then shrinking and kind of following that trend all the way through the year. The cold air comes down the mountain slopes to the west of Hobart and to the west of New Norfolk, drives the temperature down in the evenings, and then there's plenty of sunshine to warm it back up in the daytime. I really, having stood there in Hobart and looked around, it was kind of like a small version of Seattle as far as its feel. It was very maritime. And then as soon as you left the water and headed up into the valleys, it was more like a cross between South Africa and Oregon. Dry grass fields. You could tell that it was arid. You could tell that irrigation is sometime necessary, and that, without that snow melt and rain coming out of the mountains to fill up the aquifers, I'm not sure that they would be growing grapes there. And this is Hobart specifically, actually right there at Battery Point, which is down by the water. So you're going to have that same sort of shift in temperature because the water south of Tasmania is relatively cold. You see how hot it can get in Hobart, though. In the peak of summer, the highest heat they ever had was 107. So there is a source of warmth on this island, but it's ameliorated almost immediately by the effect of the ocean and the air currents coming out of the mountains. Note that in April, when they're about to harvest, when I was in Tolpuddle Vineyard on the 6th of April, they had harvested the vineyard already. And you're seeing an average low there of 45 degrees or so, 48, 45 degrees. The day I arrived, it started off the day at about 41 and then went up from there to very warm. You could easily wear shorts in the afternoon, and then by the next morning again it was chilly, about 7 degrees Celsius. All right, so let's talk about Marlborough in specific as we taste some wines. We've had our ideas. I want you to keep thinking about how these wines are reflective of the idea that it never gets terribly warm where they are, but it doesn't get overly cold, and it allows these grapes to ripen over a really long time and develop flavor profiles. So let's talk about Ponga. Ponga is actually an estate wine, 100% one estate. It is stony clay loam with silty loam. There's 900 acres in this single vineyard. It was first created in 2008. There are 420,000 bottles made. It's a huge, important product for us. And you should taste it again to remind yourself of how reflective this wine really is of what people expect out of New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. And it's an easy win. So if you're tasting the wine now, go ahead and hit pause here. For those of you who are doing this as in advance of coming to the course, the live tasting of it, just keep going. All right, so now let's look at Nautilus Sauvignon Blanc, which is a single estate as well, founded in 1985, still family owned. This one is fermented in stainless steel. They do some surly aging for 3 to 6 months. Notice Compared to the Ponga, the pH is a little lower, the total grams of acidity after fermentation are a little higher, as well as the alcohol by volume at 13%. So these are machine harvested grapes at night. Almost everything in New Zealand is machine harvested. They don't have enough labor to really do hand harvesting. So, and with today's technology, machine harvesting is not an evil concept. The machines they use now are as gentle, honestly, as human hands. What they do not allow is sorting in the vineyard, but that can be done on a sorting table as well if necessary. This wine was harvested at night to maintain the cool temperatures of the grapes coming in. Some fermentations on this wine are used with non-Saccharomyces yeast, and then after that they also add some intentionally aromatic profile yeast to get what they're looking for as the flavor of Nautilus. Remind yourself of how really bright and vibrant and perfect this wine is if you're doing this on your own, and hit pause. Otherwise, we're going to keep moving on. Let's move back to Tasmania. Beautiful picture of what it looks like there. This would have been over closer to the western shores where there's a little bit more rain, and you can see the mountains in the background and that amazing blue sky. So Jan's Tasmania Premium Cuvée is just an absolutely delicious sparkling wine. There is a potential confusion over how it's made, so let's talk about that, because you can see the stats right here on the screen. It's made by what they call méthode tasmanoise. All right, so they ferment, some of the initial fermentation is in steel, some of it is in oak. All right, then from there they move it to what would normally be considered a full cuve close method. In other words, a Charmat tank. What they do differently at this point is most Charmat method wines are intentionally fermented quickly. They get what they want going on for the sparkling aspect of it. They do not allow a large contact with the yeast because they don't want autolysis to happen, because they're semi-aromatic grapes like Prosecco. In this particular case, with Jan's, they are fermenting in the autoclave, the Charmat method, the Martinotti tank. But they are leaving it in the tank to allow autolysis to happen in that large vessel to give you the flavor profile of traditional champagne method without the extra expense. And I think it's brilliant because it allows them to sell a wine to us and us to sell to our customers at a reasonable price point that has the flavors of champagne without necessarily the price point. All right, so take a sip of this wine if this is your solo effort, and if not, we're moving on. So Tolpuddle Vineyard is a vineyard in Coal River, which is just outside of Hobart, south end of Tasmania. This is 100% Chardonnay. It's all from one 50-acre vineyard. It's fermented in oak, some of which is 225 liters, some of which is 500 liter. The soil here is this wind-blown sand and topsoil. In most places it would probably be called loess or loess or less, depending on who's pronouncing it, over sandstone. That's really unusual in the Coal River Valley because there's a swath of that where their vineyard is, and then most everybody else is a different soil. It's redder, it's a dolerite sort of thing, and it's not that it's bad for winemaking, it's just that this is so much better for Chardonnay and Pinot Noir than the neighbors. It is aged 8 months in the bottle before being released. They are dedicated to Stelvin enclosures in Tasmania as well as Australia because they don't like the idea of getting out and starting their car and 1 out of 16 or 20 times it doesn't start. So they don't want corks that 5% of the time, 2% of the time, or even 8% of the time fail. So the whole country is pretty much exclusively Stelvin inside of their own borders. I know that some people bottle things differently for the outside market. Most of their oak is used. There's a little bit that's new. This is really targeted at tasting like, feeling like, smelling like a great bottle of Burgundy. So check it out. If you haven't tasted it before, I bet it impresses you. If you are waiting until we arrive and taste together, then we're moving on. All right, we're back to Otago, South Island, New Zealand. This is a great picture of some of the landscape there, how rugged and foreboding it is. It's a striking place, and you never know who you're going to run into there. Yeah, yep, that was filmed there. So they still have a theme park if you want to go visit it with the sets. All right, let's talk about Two Paddocks Pinot Noir in specific. Two Paddocks is owned by the actor Sam Neill from Jurassic Park. He came to New Zealand with the vision of, hey man, I've heard we could make great Pinot Noir here. That was his mission. That's what he's done. And I've been in and out of tasting these wines for the last, 15 years, like from his first vintage in the U.S., and I've always been impressed with the elegance and style of these wines. So 100% Pinot Noir, cold maceration. He does 25% stem inclusions. He only uses native yeast. You can read the rest. The idea here is that he's blending, for this particular wine, he's blending from across his properties. He has 68% of this wine is from the vineyard known as La Fusilière. And then we have 13% from the Last Chance vineyard, 13% from the Red Bank vineyard, and 6% from the first paddock, the one he planted right next to his original property where they said, you can't make wine there. Well, he's proved them wrong over and over again. If you haven't shown this wine to anyone, if you haven't tasted this wine yourself, I think you're in for a treat, because this is beautifully elegant Pinot Noir with that old world delicacy, but the fruit profile that makes people who like New World wine really happy. If you're tasting it, go ahead, hit pause. Otherwise, we're moving on back to Tasmania. Another beautiful picture, much closer to the west coast, where they have these beautiful glacier-fed as well, or snowmelt-fed and rain-fed lakes from because actually the west coast of Tasmania is a full-on rainforest. It's just a temperate rainforest instead of a tropical rainforest. So Dalrymple. Pete Caldwell's the winemaker and vigneron. He manages everything there. Super awesome fellow. You're going to be able to soon find individual excursions on the corkboard with an interview with him talking about what he does there, and I think you'll find him as charming as I did. This is a blend of the vineyards in Pipers River, which you'll find pictures of in those modules that I'm talking about. But they also have vineyards they own in Coal River, not far from Tolpuddle. And then also they have some growers they're working with in Swansea and Ouse. The idea here is they're blending some more rugged vineyards with some seaside vineyards with some vineyards on, when you're talking about the Dalrymple vineyards themselves, they're on basalt soils, and then when you head south to the Coal River vineyard, it's on dolerite and sandstone, and on it goes. They use 500 kilogram bins. They're very delicate with their fruit. They're really looking for pristine as a goal. They really want their wines to be elegant and beautiful, and having tasted through them with Pete, I can tell you that they are achieving that goal regularly. These wines age really well. He showed me some older wines while I was there, and I have nothing but good things to say. So these are, he open top fermenters, he destems everything. He's not looking for the influence of the stem in his fruit. He is getting enough ripeness that he doesn't need the stem inclusion to help with pH, and he really doesn't want to accidentally end up with green. He and I talked about the idea that sometimes stem inclusion could be helpful, but only if the stems are really ripe. So he doesn't use them for his wines. Give it a taste. Make some thought about it, or be ready to taste it when we show up together a little later. So what are the key points? I think we've been very clear. This upper level of latitude combined with the roaring 40s makes a very unique place to grow grapes. And I think that each one of the wines you've tasted today, or will taste when you arrive at the group tasting, absolutely shows that we have the delicacy in these wines of what we would expect for old world versions of these grapes, but yet we have the generosity of fruit and the friendliness of the New World. It's very unique geography. I think we have a selling point for sure in this area. I know for myself, I have been waiting and waiting and waiting to see the wines from Tasmania make it into our country, because I knew from geography and geology that this place could make great wine. We've known for the last 25 years that New Zealand can make great wine, and we've seen a continual rise of what's going on in Central Otago, and these wines are no different. So thank you for your time and attention. You are going to need to verify your attendance. Here's how you do it. You're going to go to the cork board. You're going to go to Knowledge, Wine and Spirits Education, National Tasting Talk Surveys, and look for the NTT 40 degrees south and rising FY19 evaluation. Take the basic demographic survey and off you go. If you are receiving this, if you receive this for a flipping the classroom concept where you do the presentation and then come to the tasting discussion together, there was a specific evaluation in that email for you. You need to do that one to verify that you took the module before you came to class. Thank you very much. Take care, everyone.